Now you're listening to the Community Show on 10 Radio with Andrew and Pauline, but now our last guest today, we have not been able to meet for 2 previous bookings for all manner of reasons, but thankfully this morning we're very pleased to welcome George Middleton to the studio. Good morning, George.
Good morning, good morning.
It's lovely to have you here at last because we're going to talk about a yacht, a junk yacht, which is a specific name for a beautiful Eastern-style boat built in Singapore with an amazing history that's very much connected to you. So, George, this boat is called the Boleh.
Boleh, yes, which in Malay, and she was built in Singapore, in Malay means can do. And the whole story really of Boleh is about overcoming challenges of one sort or the other.
It's a can-do project.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the Boleh Trust now runs this boat, but tell us about the history of Boleh, because this is an amazing wartime story as well, going back in your family and in history.
It is. My uncle, Robin Kilroy, was in the Fleet Air Arm. And at the end of the war in Japan, found himself in Singapore, naval base in those days for the Royal Navy, and a very keen sailor, and with dreams all the time during his career of how he would design his own boat one day, build it, and then sail the world. And sure enough, he was able to do that at the end of his time in the Far East with the Navy. And he gathered together an Admiralty shipwright from the dockyard and 3 naval officers, designed and built the boat. And
designed and built the boat, just as you do.
Just as one does, yes, out of local wood. He engaged a team of boat builders from the northeast coast of what was then Malaya, Trengganu. They came down to Singapore and were engaged by him. And then they built this remarkable, unique design, which featured a whole series of innovations, inboard, outboard drive, now absolutely typical of many boats, but
not
then
at that
a new
time.
idea, exactly. And he built her with quadruped mast, which again is extremely unusual.
Hang on, what a quadruped mast?
Well, you're able to look at a picture.
I can see, but our listeners are unable to see.
It looks rather like an oil rig planted on the top of the boat. But what it does is to provide a structure up which you can put a yard, a pole as it were, sticking up, put the sail on that. And because it's a quadruped, it doesn't actually pierce the deck and go down into the cabin space.
It sits on the deck.
It sits on the deck, exactly.
How interesting. And it presumably gives more possibility for different sails at on the corners.
Well, no.
Not that I know anything about sailing, you can tell.
What it does do is make more space in the accommodation down below. It's also very strong structure and doesn't have to be supported by wire stays to actually hold the mast up. If you look at a mast on a normal boat, it's actually held up by a whole mass of steel wire usually. So a unique idea. I don't think there's another one like it in the world.
I was
probably.
going to say, did Robin Kilroy invent this kind of mast?
Yes, well, it's the only one there is. He invented that. Yeah.
Why hasn't that been taken up more? Because that seems to me, without knowing anything about sailing, to be ever so sensible.
Well, I think there are problems, of course. It is very good for some things. It allows the leading edge of the sail to be directly into the wind rather than masked by a mast itself up, which things normally slide. It's very difficult to describe this on air. And it also has a great deal of windage, so in certain directions of travel, with the wind in a particular angle, it probably impairs her performance. But his design was for long-distance sailing in the oceans of the world, and so he wanted something very rugged.
So he built Boleh in 1948.
48, 49, yes.
Yeah, and sailed her to England in 50.
Yes,
Gosh, that's
and that
such
was
a
always
journey.
the object. And the team that had worked on her, plus his Chinese cook Chang, these are days of the old colonial world,
Yes.
sailed back from 15,000 miles from Singapore back to what became her home base and was actually the home village of two of the members of the crew, Salcombe in Devon. So there's the West Country connection. And although originally Beaulieu was registered as a ship from the port of Singapore, both ships have ports of registry painted on the stern, she became a Salcombe ship and is a Salcombe ship now.
So she has Salcombe on the back?
She does.
Oh,
yes.
how lovely.
Yeah.
But she basically lives in Portsmouth.
Well, she does now. That's where the trust was set up and for the restoration of the boat, because Beaulieu had a very checkered history later on in her life. My uncle brought her back, based in Salcombe, and then used her for his own recreational sailing, but also obviously for his family and for local sea cadets and so on. But regrettably, he died early in the early 60s, and I was the only sailing member of the family, so I inherited the boat. And I was a naval cadet at Dartmouth at the time, so not actually in the best position to.
But how perfect, though, a naval cadet at Dartmouth and you inherit a boat. There's nothing more appropriate.
Well, it gave me a bit of kudos among my fellow cadets.
It's either that or owning a sports car at that stage, I suspect. But the boat is better for a naval cadet. So how on earth did you afford it, or were parents terribly helpful?
Well, I didn't. Of course, I inherited it, so I didn't have to buy it. But what we very quickly did was to put her out to the Island Cruising Club in Salcombe, which was then a very successful sailing club for young people. And she did 3 years there. And I sailed her from time to time. One of the things about being at Dartmouth, of course, was you were taught to sail, so that was rather helpful.
So you knew exactly what to do.
Yes, by the end of it, I could skipper her, so that was terrific.
But then you started your career in the Royal Navy and were posted all over the place. So you probably didn't see her very much, only intermittently on leave.
And that's exactly how it was. So she was with the Island Cruising Club. And then she moved to Dover to be a sail training vessel for the Royal Engineers Junior Leaders Regiment. And that, again, lasted about 3 years. And, of course, by then I was the other side of the world, so I hardly ever saw her. But nominally I was the owner. Well, I was the owner. And when I came back from the Far East, and the Royal Engineers had won a wonderful grant from the Nuffield Trust to buy themselves something rather more modern than Beaulieu, and certainly rather easier to operate. So we put it on the market, regrettably, because naval sub-lieutenants cannot afford large yachts. And she was bought, and really then went abroad again, and we lost track of her.
Oh gosh!
So there's then a gap in the knowledge from the family's point of view of where Beaulieu was, but
you literally didn't know where she had gone.
No, and that's what happens if you sell something, I think. But what we now know is that she was in Rye Harbour having a refit in the late 70s when somebody set fire to her.
Do you mean it was arson?
It was arson, yes.
Oh, how awful.
And nobody quite knows why some lunatic decided to set fire to her, but he did.
Vile.
And there was a man called Roger Angel who was a joiner and a very keen sailor, who saw her as a wreck in Rye Harbour and bought her as an insurance write-off for £1.
Oh. Good heavens.
And she was badly burnt on the upper works, behind the where the mast was, and really right to the back of the boat, using non maritime terminology. And yes, she was a write-off, but he he put her in a mud berth in Rye, and then with some friends and a bit of help from bits of council timber which he found lying around, he then very professionally, even though he wasn't a shipwright, restored her. And he was able to look at the book which my uncle had written of his voyage, Beaulieu, published by Hodder and Stoughton in 1950. Because the journey back from, just going back a bit, the journey back from Singapore to Salcombe was quite a story in 1950, front page
That is
story.
such a long way.
Yeah. So Roger looked at the book. There were no plans that he had, but what he managed to do was to make contact with people who had sailed Beaulieu before. And he painstakingly restored Beaulieu with the help of his friends. And outwardly, she looked pretty much as she had done when she was originally designed.
What a wonderful saint that person was.
Absolutely.
It
Well,
could have just been scrapped.
and the interesting thing is, he was convinced that he was in touch with my uncle.
You mean spiritually?
Absolutely.
Oh, really?
And
he was guiding him.
he was guiding him, exactly.
Really? Why did he think that? What was happening?
Well, I didn't. I met Roger Angel later in the story, but I don't quite know how he managed to have this spiritual connection with my uncle, who was a very unspiritual man. But however, it drove Roger on to continue the restoration, despite all the obvious difficulties there were. Anyway, eventually he achieved that in 81, I think. And then he, like Robin, and incidentally that's a real can-do thing he'd achieved, wasn't it? Like Robin, he had this vision of sailing his own boat round the world. He set off with his friends. He hadn't done, I don't think, much ocean sailing before, but they eventually got to the Mediterranean with various interesting and amusing stories along the way, which is recorded actually in a pamphlet by one of his friends, David Sully, called "A Rising from the Ashes," which is on the website, as is the book I mentioned earlier. Roger Angel, made his home in the Mediterranean with Beaulieu, and financed his sailing by doing joinery for oligarchs and other rich yacht owners, either ashore or on their super yachts. So you then move the story on to the late 90s. And I have a brother who was in the Air Force and I was in the Navy, and we were both nearing retirement. And Henry, my brother, said one day, "I wonder what's happened to Beaulieu." So he went on the internet and eventually found a picture of her, and obviously it took some time, but followed that up and eventually got in touch with Roger Angel. Roger Angel, of course, thought once again Robin had guided the family to talk to him. And as he was suffering from cancer at the time and thinking it was about time to give up sailing Beaulieu, he thought, here is a useful connection. We then move on a couple of years, and Beaulieu he'd said that we would get first crack at buying her if he sold her. And he did indeed put her on the market, and in 2007 we went out to see her. And of course, it was rather emotional seeing Beaulieu again after all that time. And Henry and I swore to each other that we were not going to buy Beaulieu unless we had a use that we could put her to that would help people. And coincidentally, when we did go out to Mallorca, which was where she was, a very well-known boat called Jolly Breeze, skippered by Toby Maris, happened to be alongside as well. Jolly Breeze is the sailing yacht of Daunce's School in Wiltshire, and Henry had been bursar of Daunce's School after he left the Air Force. And the one thing Toby Maris, a very, very, very experienced skipper, said was, "On no account, Henry, buy that boat. You won't be able to afford it." He's absolutely right, of course. A wooden boat's a very expensive thing. Anyway, we convinced ourselves we could. We found a charity in Portsmouth that we could put the boat with, which actually trained apprentices and took people sailing, did all the right things. And hey presto, we bought the boat from Roger for not a lot of money, of course, because of the state she was in by then, and bought her back to England, Portsmouth, on a low loader across Europe. That was quite a story too. But we got her to Portsmouth, put her into a shed, and the charity immediately went bust. So we overcame that, formed a trust, the Beaulieu Trust, as a charity to restore it, and again, a long story. Had registered as a National Historic Ship because of all the very strange and innovative features of the boat, as well as our history. And on that platform, we then approached the Heritage Lottery Fund, and we had an initial relatively modest grant from them to help with training an apprentice. And then the excellent man who was in charge of the southeast section of the HLF said, why don't you actually ask for a bigger one and get the boat restored completely? It's obviously a wonderful vehicle for training people. So we ended up getting a grant for £500,000.
Oh, fabulous.
Wow.
Absolutely amazing.
And was that enough to do the work you needed?
Well, it wasn't, needless to say, because these things never are enough, and the restoration took us much longer than we'd expected.
Well, and that always case.
But that's always the case.
Yes.
But we set up a proper apprentice school, tied it in with the local technical college, and qualified some apprentices who worked on the boat, and we also worked with the local community. And created the website you've just mentioned as an archive of Beaulieu's history. We teamed up with Charter Academy, which was one of a comprehensive school in the poor part of Portsmouth, and took some of their classes to work with us. So that was all very, very worthwhile, but quite an undertaking, actually, as it happened. But at the end of all that, in 2015, she was back in the water looking absolutely magnificent. And the website, of course, has got lovely pictures of all that, and of the restoration, and of our wonderful apprentices. And then we again wanted to team up with a charity that did sail training and so on, because we didn't think that we, the trustees, didn't think it was really our strong suit to take all the risks of an operational sail training organisation. So we went down to Falmouth and teamed up with a charity down there, so another West Country link. But unfortunately, overall, the chemistry didn't work, and we mutually decided that that wasn't going to actually last very long. So yet another can-do moment. So we brought Beaulieu back to Portsmouth and said, among the trustees, we said, OK, well, we'll do it ourselves. And so we now run a sail training operation based in Gosport, Portsmouth Harbour, and we have a whole series now of customers, if that's the word, that we've built up, who sail with us in Beaulieu, and teamwork and confidence, new experiences are all available.
When you're, because looking at the leaflet that you brought in for us as well, and looking at the work you do now, do you have, I mean, you must have a staff now that runs the day-to-day trust's work, so people who are skippering the boat, people
Volunteers,
who are taking
yes.
care
Yeah.
of the young people when they're out on exercises, if you like.
Absolutely. Well, again, one of the challenges was to build up a core of volunteer skippers and mates. You need two people who were properly qualified, because we operate as a commercially registered vessel, So there's an enormous amount of compliance in everything we do,
I bet.
whether it's safeguarding or seamanship.
Health and safety.
Exactly.
Oh, gosh.
So we worked our way through all that. We were helped initially very much by a firm called Halcyon Yachts, who do yacht delivery but also provide crews. So obviously we have to raise money to do anything, and some of that money was spent on Halcyon, but they were part of our transition into doing it ourselves. We have a lovely raft of volunteer crew now, and the trustees do all the planning and overseeing and management. And very recently, thanks to our generous donors, we've been able to afford one paid hand, as it were, who is our operations director.
Who kind of takes care
Exactly.
of Beaulieu and is on call.
And is a skipper as well. So that's an enormous.
So-
well, it's a cost, but it's also an enormous relief. And you have to be very professional in this when you're dealing with young children.
Sure.
Everything has to be absolutely safe, and the sail
And
planning and
compliant.
everything safe as well.
All the young people that you train and give this opportunity to, how many courses or journeys does Beaulieu do? How many young people might you
Well,
help in a year, let's say?
the way we do it is Beaulieu is not really a sail training vessel in terms of its easy handling and so on, but it gives people this wonderful experience. So most of our sailing is day sailing from Gosport with school children, particularly service school children, whose parents are away and so on, but also other inner city children. But twice a year we do a cruise. We go down to Portland and sail some Dorset schools. And then we also, the last 2 years, we've taken Devon Army cadets, Army Cadet Force cadets on a weekly cruise. So 2 lots, that's a fortnight, and the same again this year.
So I'm so glad you're encouraging the Army to get involved on watery matters.
Yeah.
I'm not just sticking to naval families.
No, well, we do also have pure naval and Royal Marine customers, because this year we've done Help for Heroes style work with Royal Naval Wounded, Injured and Sick Recovery Programme. And they get a week with us.
And that's useful.
And we can only take, we're not a very big boat, weigh 16 tonnes and 40 foot long, use it in old money. But that means wonderfully ocean going, but not very big. So we usually take 6. We can take 8.
But that's a nice number.
People. Yes,
because
it
they
is.
can really, really get involved, and you get to know the younger people.
Yeah, I think that's an
or
important point.
The veterans or whoever you're teaching.
And particularly the feedback we get from these recovery program, for example, is and it's a mixture of Marines and Navy and sailors, is just this ability to be doing something completely different and rebuilding. These are people with PSTD and so on, rebuilding confidence and rebuilding almost social skills.
Yes,
because
they've been severely damaged in different ways.
Exactly.
Absolutely. George, we have run out of time. I hate to say, but listening to your story of Beaulieu is absolutely fascinating, because there were 2 really huge periods where she was totally lost, potentially, and you've brought her back to the condition she is now, which looks beautiful, and giving all manner of disadvantaged people, young and old, the chance to sail, and most of you are volunteers, apart from one. It's a great story. It's a can-do story. Yeah,
well, we've got Princess Anne coming to visit us in November, which we're very honoured to do.
And she will love it.
Yes,
she will love it, because she's such a focused royal visitor, and she'll enjoy seeing the work you're doing, I know.
She's also a keen yachtswoman, of course. So I think she'll be interested in some of the strange aspects of Beaulieu.
Yeah.
I hope so, anyway.
Yeah, particularly that mast.
Yes, yeah.
George, thank you so much, and I'm so glad we finally managed to collide on the community show. Lovely to see you, and thank you for talking about the can-do ship, Boley. Absolutely lovely. And we're at the end of our show today. Thank you, Andrew, for everything. Thank you to all of our guests. And we end the programme with a very appropriate piece of music. What are we going to hear?
We're going to hear Hearts of Oak, as Boley was designed and built by naval officer, crewed by the Navy, and now serves the Navy again. I thought Hearts of Oak, which is the regimental march of the Royal Navy, would be appropriate.
And no more appropriately played by the band of the Royal Marines as well. So
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.